Great. Well, we'll start here in just a minute. Just welcoming those as you're joining us today on the webinar on 30 by 30 and America the Beautiful. We'll wait just a few more minutes as more people join. Looks like quite a few coming in right now. But thank you again for being here. Again, for those of you who are just joining us, we're just waiting as people come on in. We got 255 people so far on the line, and more coming in by the second here. So we'll wait a few more minutes and let everybody get in. Good, and we're still adding people, still joining. I don't know what everybody's weather's like around the West in the country, but I can say right now that it's absolutely gorgeous day down here in Santa Fe, New Mexico, where I'm based. Looking forward to summer right now, even though it's going to be a dry one. I enjoy the summer. So let's see, we've got 286 people so far. All righty. Well, why don't we go ahead and get started right now? People continue to come in, but we'll go ahead and kick it off. So we have plenty of time. My name is Leslie Allison. I'm the Executive Director of the Western Landowners Alliance. I just want to say welcome to all of you for joining us today. We are pleased to be able to convene this conversation on the topic of 30 by 30 and the recently released report, the America the Beautiful. As most of you are probably aware, 30 by 30 has sparked a national conversation about land and water conservation. There are a lot of landowners who've expressed deep concern and many others who see potential for positive outcomes. And we're here to get a better understanding of what 30 by 30 is all about and how it might affect landowners and working lands, particularly in the West. And as we have this conversation, I would encourage all of our speakers, panelists, and participants to consider two questions in the back of your mind. The first is this: most people who, including those who steward our working lands, care deeply about nature and conservation. But conservation has also become increasingly politicized and divisive. So how does 30 by 30 present an opportunity? Does it present an opportunity to redefine conservation in a way that works for more Americans? And what would it take for that to happen in the current context of hyper-political partisanship? And the second question is, what is the consequence of no action? Do we want to live in a world or leave our children a future in which less than 30% or 20% or 10% of our lands, waters, and ecosystems remain intact? And the stakes are pretty high, which is why WLA got involved early with the Biden transition team and the administration to ensure that the voices of those who steward land are at the table and to inform and help shape these decisions. We found that the USDA and Department of Interior have been very receptive to our input, and we're very appreciative of that. And we're particularly grateful today to have joining us for this discussion, Kate Kelly and Martha Williams. Kate is the Deputy Chief of Staff for Policy at the Department of the Interior. Kate most recently was the Public Lands Director at the Center for American Progress. During the Obama administration, Kate served as Senior Advisor to then Secretary of Interior, Sally Jewell, and also served as Communications Director on behalf of Secretary Jewell and former Secretary of the Interior, Ken Salazar. Prior to joining the Interior Department, Kate worked in the U.S. Senate. She received her bachelor's degree from Washington University in St. Louis and hails from Colorado. Martha is the Principal Deputy Director of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Martha has spent her career fostering a love of the outdoors. Growing up on a farm, she gained an appreciation for place and all that comprises it. This passion led her to the wild places of the West, where she focused on public lands and wildlife, first as attorney for the Montana Department of Fish, Wildlife, and Parks, then as Deputy Solicitor, Parks and Wildlife at the Department of the Interior, as a professor at the Blue-Lit School of Law at the University of Montana, and most recently returning to Montana Department of Fish, Wildlife, and Parks as its director. I also want to say how much we appreciate our panelists for taking the time to join us today. And I'd like each of you to introduce yourselves before we turn this over to Zach. So I'll just start across my screen. Brenda, would you mind going ahead and introducing yourself?
Thank you, Leslie, and thanks to everyone who's listening, and also for the opportunity to have this discussion. I think you kept it well on the opportunity and for these listening sessions. My name is Brenda Richards. I am currently serving as the coordinator for the Idaho Rangeland Conservation Partnership. We are family ranchers in Owyhee County, Idaho. My husband's a fourth generation rancher, and we are very, very dedicated to this. I also have served as the past president of the Public Lands Council, and served for over 20 years on the Owyhee Initiative, which is a collaborative group over here that look to solve some issues such as we're talking about today, and appreciate the opportunity to be here.
Thank you. Jack, would you mind introducing yourself, please?
Yes, good morning or good afternoon, depending on where we're all located. We currently have a what I consider a traditional cow-calf operation out here in northeastern California, Lassen County to be specific. It's mostly high desert. The base elevation of the ranch itself is about 5,000 feet, and then we graze up in the mountains up to about 8,000 feet. I'm here with my wife and our two sons and their family. I'm a first generation rancher, being born and raised in the San Francisco Bay Area and graduated from the University of California there at Berkeley. And obviously started a career in the city, but found myself continuing to yearn to get outside and into the country, and adopted the ranching lifestyle, and been in it since about 1975, and here at this location since 1982. I also, just like Brenda, have a real passion, obviously, for conserving not only the great outdoors that we're blessed to have here, but also the ranching lifestyle, which I have come to really enjoy. And to do that, I was on the formative board of the California Rangeland Trust, and I continue to sit on that board. And obviously the Rangeland Trust, you can get from its name, its primary concern is preserving grazing lands in the state of California. But thank you very much for the opportunity to address this issue. I am one of those that obviously is interested, but a little bit anxious, to say the very least. So just appreciate the opportunity to be heard.
Great, terrific. Thank you, Jack. And Tuda, would you mind going ahead and introducing yourself?
Thank you, Leslie. It's a pleasure to be here today. I'm Tuda Libby Cruz from Boyeros, New Mexico, population 4. We're in the northeastern corner of the state. This is a beautiful landscape. We're in Harding County. We have wonderful neighbors. We have a lot of really good ranchers neighboring us. We have 706 people and about 40,000 head of cattle. We're very isolated, very remote. I live 47 miles from a gallon of milk in any direction, and I wouldn't live anyplace else in the world. I inherited a fifth of my family ranch 20 years ago, and my husband and I came back here, and we've done a lifetime of work in the last 2 decades. Could not have done it without the agency's help, NRCS and Partners for Fish and Wildlife group. We've transformed the ranching operation. It was very degraded when we came, and we've completely turned it around. Even added a herd of really nice Angus cows, and they do a lot of good work for us, grazing and taking care of that time management system that maximizes forage. So we work closely with the land. We have a wild bird sanctuary here on the ranch, which kind of sets us apart. I'm birdie. I can't identify a lot of them, but I certainly can provide habitat for them, and I'm dedicated to that. I think we all know that birds are in steep decline, and conservation on the ground is going to make the difference for keeping them around. They are indicators of healthy ecosystems, so they're very important to what all of us do. We need to recognize that. But my goal is to keep the ranch in the family for future generations. We have a daughter, Libby, and son, Ted, and we have 3 grandchildren, Bella, Wood, and Bennett and Seth Cruz. And I think about their future and what it will be. I've been involved with rural revitalization for the last decade very strongly. And, I just believe that everything is connected to the land. And we have wildlife habitat. We've increased, water. We've done all the things that we can do for conservation, but we also have to think about our rural communities and the economic viability of them and getting young people back on the land. So it's a pretty big umbrella that we work under, but we strive for that and strive to find that balance. But we just appreciate our many partners and collaborators and participants that help give us technical direction and keep this place going and making it be the best that it can be. I've had a love affair with the land that only grows with time. And I think all of us feel that way about our place. So thank you. And thank you, Kate and Martha, for this opportunity to share. I have hope and opportunity in this Keep America Beautiful initiative. I want to be part of the solution. And I just want you to know that. So thank you.
Great, terrific. I'd also like to just recognize quickly Lewis Wirtz and our communication team who are working behind the scenes. You won't see them here, but they're a critical part of this conversation. So thank you, Lewis and the WLA gang behind the scenes. And then to set the stage for this discussion, I'm going to turn this now over to Zach Bodane. Zach is WLA's policy director, currently based in Washington, D.C. And previously, Zach led the Working Lands initiatives, particularly on wildlife policy at the Western Governors Association. So Zach, why don't you take it away?
Yeah, sure thing. Thanks, Leslie. And thanks to all the panelists and people in the audience. We're just really, really happy you could take the time out to join us this afternoon. I just want to go over a few quick logistical notes. Given the size of this meeting, the chat function is enabled, but we still really want to hear questions from you all and make sure that we're hearing from you throughout this. So you'll notice there's a Q&A tab on the bottom. So just feel free throughout the event to type your question in there as folks are speaking, and we'll have our staff reviewing those and try to get to as many as we can. And recognize that we may not be able to get to all of them, but we'll try and follow up as best as we can. So with all that said and all that out of the way, I think I will turn things over to Martha now.
Thank you, Zach. And I thank you, Leslie, and thank you, Western Landowners Alliance, for setting up this webinar. And I'll say more in thanks also for your leadership in working with us to show the power of engagement and true leadership, and us continuing. It's really hard to follow you, Tuda, continuing the love affair with the land. And I want you to know that we share that love affair, and this initiative is coming from that very place. So the conversation today is about the America the Beautiful initiative, which we have framed, the administration has framed as a 10-year locally led campaign to conserve and restore the lands and waters upon which we all depend and that bind us together as Americans. And I just want to keep repeating that to myself too, because I think that language is telling and is important. And I hope that you can hear in that language, there is a recognition of the great value that you bring to the landscape, that your stewardship of the land lends to the country. A little bit of background. I did grow up on a working family farm that my parents are in their late 80s and they still run. with my brother starting to take over. And so we grew up where the land and place was our identity, and it remains that way. My parents will be buried on the farm, and all of our dinner table conversations revolved around conservation of agriculture as a way of life. So including the community around us and what it takes to sustain that. And then my parents, they say it was one of their biggest mistakes. You can be the judge of that. Took us west on a big family trip. And thereafter, I spent all of my summers working on a ranch in Wilson, Wyoming, when Wilson was still a small town, where we rode our horses to the stagecoach bar and tied them up and rode them back. Things have changed a little bit in that area now, but I fell in love with the West as a place then, and followed that throughout the rest of my life. So I just want to commend you sincerely for engaging in this topic and your leadership in how you have engaged. I hope that you can see your comments and thoughts already in the report, but I also want I want us to be able to convey to you that we sincerely want to hear from you. We sincerely want to continue to work with you and use this as an opportunity. And so as the Principal Deputy Director from the Fish and Wildlife Service, in implementing this initiative, I want you to know I think of it as an opportunity, that the report already showed demonstrated some nuance and an appreciation for the richness of the different types of uses of the land and stewardship of the land that lend value to all of us in this country. And so I also would love for this initiative to help move the Fish and Wildlife Service where we can have a real focus on habitat, on functioning ecosystems, and the benefit to all species from that. So instead of a focus on specific species, which we will always have to do to some degree under the law, I would like this to be this opportunity to think about how can we look at the landscape more holistically and help with those functioning ecosystems and how they're also integrally tied to each other so that we can be part of this bigger picture. As Kate will get into the substance of the report, like I said, I hope
Yeah, so I think we might have just lost Martha there. At least that's how it's coming through on my end. But Kate, maybe do you want to step in? Because I think she was just about to tee you up.
That sounds great. I can do that. And I feel like she left us on with a cliffhanger there. I don't know what the next part was. But hi, everybody. My name is Kate Kelly. I am the Deputy Chief of Staff at Interior for Policy, as Leslie mentioned. And I hail from Colorado, but like Zach, am currently living in DC, but long to go west often. I also just want to offer and start with my thanks to Leslie and the Western Landowners Alliance for all the work and input that they have done over the past many months to help shape this conversation. I served on the Biden-Harris transition team, and they reached out early and often help ensure that we were hearing from the right voices and thinking about the president's conservation vision, and have been really helpful and influential in making as we go forward. So I am actually going to share my screen and do a quick presentation on the report that we put out last week. My assumption is that you all have not read every single line of it, so it may be helpful just to start that as for a foundation of this conversation. I'll be very quick about it so we don't stare at a slide deck all day and get to the actual meat of the conversation. But let me see if I can successfully share my screen. So let's see. Zach, are you seeing something?
Yep, looks good on my end.
Okay, let's do this. All right. So as Martha said, I'll just read what our top line recommendations are. That this is a preliminary report that the Interior Department led with our friends at USDA, CEQ, and NOAA. And we made a preliminary recommendation to the White House for a 10-year locally led campaign to conserve and restore the lands and waters upon which we all depend and that bind us together as Americans. I think this is the first time that a president has set a national conservation goal. And so it certainly merits the question of why this is important. And so I think we believe that something like this, an inclusive and ambitious goal, is important for three reasons. One, to address the loss of nature that we are witnessing and the loss of wildlife, birds, fish across the country that we are witnessing. Second would be certainly to address the climate crisis that we are experiencing, historic droughts, longer wildfire seasons. These are things that impact our communities, our health, our well-being in real time now. And then the last is this disparities in access to the outdoors. I think we all want to live in a country where every child has access to the great outdoors and the benefits that come with it. And we know that communities of color, particularly in urban areas, have less access to the great outdoors in ways that we would like to remedy. In order to develop this report, like I said, and Martha said, we've done a lot of listening. We conducted outreach through listening sessions, again, with our partners at USDA and beyond, to meet with tribal leaders, ranching and farming coalitions, private landowners, sportsmen and women, and beyond. The report is clear to say that this is really just the beginning of a conversation, and that we are looking forward to additional engagement in the days, weeks, months, years to come as we move forward. As I mentioned at the top, this report recommends a 10-year locally led campaign to conserve, connect, and restore America's lands and waters. It recognizes the need for a balanced approach across all regions. This is not just about public lands in the West, but thinking about the unique approaches that we need both, and the unique threats to lands and the tools that are available to us across the country. You'll note that the report emphasizes the word conservation rather than protection or preservation, recognizing that there's a continuum of practices on lands that provide the outcomes for wildlife and people that are important to this. And the report also, it's fairly high level. It seeks to outline the principles by which the Biden-Harris administration would pursue conservation. First, it should be collaborative and inclusive. Second, people should be at the center of it, that conservation should benefit people. Third, this should be locally led efforts, locally designed efforts. Fourth, we need to honor tribal sovereignty. Fifth, and these are in no particular order, we need to think about the economy and pursue approaches that create jobs, whether that's restoration and resilience investments, and ways that create opportunities for ranches and farms to keep working lands working. We need to honor private property rights and the voluntary stewardship efforts that some of us have already talked about earlier. We need to use science as a guide, and that includes kind of the traditional ecological knowledge that tribes bring to the table and that ranchers and farmers bring to the table, frankly, having worked the lands for generations in many cases. And lastly, we need to build on existing tools and strategies. There are many programs that I think with additional support could help this overall effort. I will go to the areas of focus that are mentioned in the report. This is based on things that we heard again in the conversations. And this is an area where we heard that national leadership could help move the ball forward. So the first would be creating more parks and safe outdoor spaces in nature-deprived communities. We announced $150 million in grants from the National Park Service last week to help underserved communities create parks. Second would be supporting tribally led conservation and restoration priorities. Third would be looking to enhance fish and wildlife habitat and corridors. And in the report, we list a number of programs where we can support at-risk species through migratory bird joint ventures or through Partners for Fish and Wildlife Service. The fourth area is looking for opportunities to increase access for outdoor recreation. Teddy Roosevelt Conservation Partnership has done some great analysis of just how many lands are landlocked in the West because of to hunting and angling and other things. And so we looking for opportunities to increase access for that outdoor recreation. The fifth would be to incentivize and reward the voluntary conservation efforts of fishers, ranchers, farmers, and forest owners. We name a number of Farm Bill programs and note that that is up for reauthorization in 2023. We also name a number of the programs that Martha oversees in her role at Fish and Wildlife Service. Again, Partners for Fish and Wildlife Program and beyond. And lastly, the last area of focus is creating jobs by investing in restoration and resilience. The president has laid out a bold plan, the American Jobs Plan, that calls for investments to create a civilian climate corps to put young people to work, kind of restoring in our public lands and waters, opportunities for investments in reforestation, reclamation, and resilience, and thinking about how we restore some of the major ecosystems across our country. Lastly, the report acknowledges that this is just a starting point. Again, we look forward to additional conversations as we move forward, tribal consultations, public comment, meetings like this, and additional opportunities to engage with states. I think we have found a lot of, I'm trying to end my slideshow, interest in the conversation, and so are happy to continue to go forward. Did I stop sharing my slides?
I think they're still up.
Okay, well, how are we there?
There we go.
Okay, there we go, thanks. So with that, I will pause, I think, and see if we've been rejoined by Martha and turn it back over to Zach.
Yeah, it looks like Martha is back in. Great. Well, thanks so much, Martha and Kate. I think what we'd like to do now is just reserve some time to make sure that you're hearing from some of the panelists that we have assembled what you need to know, or have a chance to ask questions that would be helpful for you all to consider as you move forward, and also give a chance for some of our panelists to ask some questions that are on their mind. So maybe first, Kate, I'll just go to you and see if you have any questions, or you want to pick the brains of any of the folks on the panel.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you for the opportunity, Zach. So yeah, we, as I mentioned, and as hopefully came through in the slides in the report, efforts that are locally led are the bread and butter of what makes for successful and durable conservation. And so I'd love to hear from the panelists where you see opportunities for that. What is working in your community? What are kind of points of light that we can learn from as we move forward?
And Kate, if I can add in there, I saw one of the questions from Gary Burnett is what is locally led? So I'd add that to the question as well.
Yeah, that's a great point. Thanks, Martha.
Yes. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah,
I was I was just, I really appreciate that question and your thought process on what is locally led, because as Jack indicated, I think those of us that have a passion for working on this type of thing and finding the opportunity in it also have neighbors, and in my role, work with different stakeholders that might be scared about how that's going to be defined, whether it's going to be designations or restrictions. And so I really appreciate that locally led aspect. When Martha opened this and talked about it being a 10-year campaign, I am going to just throw out a little bit of history and experience from the Owyhee Initiative. Owyhee County is in the southwest corner of Idaho. We cover 7,666 square miles. We are 75.8% BLM. We have 17.5% private, but that private land, our economic backbone is agriculture, and the number of cattle, and I would say that we've got over 130,000 head of cattle in the county, various feedlots, grazing, ranches, that type of thing. So it's a challenge. It took us 9 years to get some of these things resolved. We were able to bring stakeholders in, but also that cross-education component of, if you're going to have healthy, resilient landscapes, it has to have economic viability for these rural communities in the West. And that's one thing that we really need to make sure is resonated, is our communities in the West are so different from the Midwest or even in Texas, where there's a lot more private land. We have to have working ranches as a unit, which goes across land ownership. And I would say 10 years is a good start, but in order to get true buy-in and locally led aspect, that may be where we get the quantification, and we're working towards that. So I'm encouraged by that, but let's work to get it right and not get it fast. And I think there's some huge opportunity with some locally led collaboratives, such as look in the initiative. We've also got neighbors here, much as Tuda said. Maybe it's not a quantifiable with NRCS or with another program on best management practices or things that we are doing, as Tuda said, bird sanctuaries, conservation. Every decision that we make here on the ranch, obviously, Jack said that he's a new rancher. That's an important thing. People are here by choice. This is our career choice. This is where we want to be, and so we're very vested in making sure that we have resilient landscapes, biodiversity, and really want to see that across land ownership. So we've got to look to those local communities and figure out what's working there, whether it's through extension. But I would encourage, our organizations finding that capacity to count some of the things that are already being done out there, so that you don't lose that unfragmented landscape. Because if you lose the private landowners or the working ranches that depend on, a lot of times, private, federal, and state, if you lose that ranch as a working unit, I will tell you that every weekend, we are 45 minutes from Nampa. We're in about an hour and a half from Boise. And with the increase in interest in getting out, the increase in open space, we get asked every week if we have 10 acres for sale, 5 acres for sale. That's part of, we want to see this as a working landscape and that open space. So that's part of the equation. We need to make sure that we figure out how to value that and maybe work with some of these groups that are already in place. Like I said, it may not be a public program, but a good example for us is we have large segments, if not most of our creek that runs through the ranch fenced. We utilize that depending on the year. It might be time and intensity, but we watch daily how that is reacting, because we have birds, we have beaver, we have fish, we have all of that. And we've seen such good results for the ranch, for the water retention, for the meadows, but also for the wildlife and everything. It's not a publicly noted thing, but it certainly should be something that if there's a metrics to conserve, that we should be able to report that and have that counted as a stream segment. So I'll jump off because I'm sure Tuda and Jack, we're all very.
Thank you. You know, I'd be happy to take an opportunity to continue what Brenda said, and I might offer just a little bit more background on our operation and some of the things we've accomplished in the past through collaboration with a number of NGOs and other public entities, because I think, Kate, that's probably a good place to start. We, as Brenda indicated, within probably all the areas in which at least ranching and outdoor recreation and so on occur, and those lands which I already consider conserved, to be quite honest with you, but will probably be included in the calculation on 30 by 30. I think there exist a lot of collaborative efforts out there on which we can capitalize. For instance, by the way, Tuda, I share your passion for birds. We happen to work with the Cornell Lab of Ornithology and Ducks Unlimited, obviously. Ducks Unlimited has been an outstanding partner on enhancing the migratory corridor from the Central Valley of California back up north to Alaska and Canada and so on. And in addition to that, we've worked extensively with Point Blue, which is a conservation organization out of the Bay Area, and obviously focusing on birds as well. So I guess my point is that there are a number of different opportunities that already exist at the local level, other than, say, the county governments, and I certainly wouldn't exclude them, obviously. And we've established here on our ranch and within our area what I would consider an excellent working relationship or collaborative relationship with the agency folks that are here. And I'd look to them to be part of the discussion, not necessarily take the lead on the discussion. I don't know that that would be necessarily the best opportunity, but our BLM in Lassen County, we have one basic industry, primary industry, and that's prisons. We have 2 state prisons, a federal prison, and we have a military base, an Army depot here in Lassen County. They provide primary employment around the area. However, just like Tuda and Brenda, we're about 70% publicly owned land. We've got a big swath of BLM property that virtually all grazed, and then we have 2 national forests that come into Lassen County. In fact, our ranch, even though it's not a large operation, we have the geographic boundary between the Cascade Mountain Range and the Great Basin. So part of the ranch is kind of a little bit forested, if you will, and the other part is high desert. We mostly depend on the high desert area. So as I said, I think I would capitalize on the current relationships which exist out here in rural America anyway. I think they're really strong. They've certainly strengthened over the last 10 or 20 years. I think that there are a number of NGOs, might be considered on the environmental side, that do understand the value of having working landscapes and conserving those working landscapes. I'd be happy to continue the conversation, but I'll turn it over to Tuda and let her continue. And Tuda, I would put ditto on everything you said in your introductory comments. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. And I can't resist saying this, but we've never met. You know, the people that are part of this webinar must realize that we have never met. But I just have to say, I'll show you mine if you'll show me yours, because I want to see your ranches in Idaho and in California. So we're going to have to figure out a way to make that happen.
I can assure you, my wife and I love coming down to New Mexico, and especially Santa Fe as well. So
Well, you're going to
we'll
love
make
it.
that happen.
Well, I can say that restoration on Ute Creek Cattle Company has been the most satisfying experience that I've ever had. It takes time. It takes, it's worth the wait. It's measurable. It's critically important to wildlife and to our bottom line. I mean, let's face it, when we have productive lands, it's a win-win for everyone, including the climate crisis. It's probably the most valuable effort that I've ever undertaken, because we have made such a difference. And I'm going to bring up the word leadership here, because I so appreciate the comprehensive approach that this Keep America, or America the Beautiful initiative has brought. It means a great deal to everyone on the land that we are at the table and will continue to have a place at the table. And I really appreciate the fact that it's going toward being locally led, because I believe the stewards on the land are the ones to really step up to the plate and lead this whole initiative, because we're the ones with the knowledge of the ecosystem, and they're very different. They're different in every county, and sometimes they're different on a single ranch. So we have to understand, the complexities that are involved with it. But I do believe strongly that we have an opportunity to make a huge difference. If everyone does their part collectively, we could make an enormous impact, not only on mitigating this climate crisis that we're in, but in our communities, on our bottom line, for our families, for future generations. We have to think on a very large scale. So I believe it's time for landowners to take advantage of this opportunity and step up and say, I want to be part of the solution. Step forward and just say it and get involved. The door is wide open, and I think it rides on our shoulders. We have a responsibility and an obligation. We know it can be done because you've heard Brenda and Jack talk about it, and I know we've completely restored and turned around this whole ranch operation, and it's been great fun, and I'm really proud of what we've done. And I'm going to be honest with you, I like being acknowledged for what I've done, because I think there's such a disconnect between people in the urban areas and people who are actually on the land doing the work. They don't know where their food comes from. They really feel that it comes from the grocery store or the restaurant. They don't know that it takes almost a year to get a steak on a plate. And part of that is our fault, because we've held it too close to our chest. We need to shuffle those cards again and start passing them around and tell the stories of the land and give them examples and have them appreciate the work that we do. So, well, that's my story, and I'm sticking to it, folks. So thank you.
Thanks so much, Tuda. And I think that actually teed up your point about being recognized, actually teed up a really good question that we got. And I want to make sure that we have time to get to some of the questions coming in from the audience. So I think I would just ask Kate and Martha, what does 30 by 30 really mean for landowners who already manage land holistically and have improved ecosystems and soil health?
Martha, do you want to take a shot? I'm happy to take that too. Or I'll go first and you can back me up.
Well, I think we both have thoughts on this. Why don't you go ahead, Kate, and I will jump in too after you.
That's a great question. I think that the short answer is, what we heard during the listening session is exactly kind of some of the themes that we heard on this panel already, that we need to acknowledge and lift up the amazing work that ranchers and farmers and private landowners are already doing, and the ways that they are helping connect up the landscapes and to support the biodiversity. And so that is absolutely a principle of 30 by 30 and how we go forward. My hope is that what this means is that there will be more opportunities for partnerships and resources to support the work that you are doing and to acknowledge that. I think a question that came up often in the conversation is what counts, right? What will this count toward 30 by 30? And we realized, I suppose, over the last couple of months that we don't have the right tools right now to account for and honor the great work that you are doing. And so, for example, the USGS has a database called the PAD Tracker, Protected Area Database, that kind of acknowledges the national parks and things that we think of that are permanently protected. Well, that's not the whole story, right, of what conservation is and what conservation should look like. And so, we in this report recommend that we need to do a better job of acknowledging and counting the conservation that you've all laid out today. And so we are starting an interagency working group with NRCS and the other land management agencies that can help us get to a better, more inclusive understanding and definition of conservation that acknowledges what's happening on working lands and really provides a much more comprehensive picture for the outcomes, again, that we're looking at. So I'll stop there and turn it over to Martha.
Thanks, Kate. I obviously agree with all that you have just said. And I'm going to the question that I saw, what does 30 by 30 really mean for landowners who already have improved ecosystems and soil health, for example? The way I read the report is it explicitly acknowledges that conservation already, so that it's lending support for, let's look at conservation more holistically, not just as a map or lines on a map, but recognizing all the different pieces that go into it and recognizing the critical piece of stewardship that many landowners have already done for a long time. What I would ask back though, I couldn't agree with you more. The fancy words, fine. They can sound wonderful, although I don't think you can sound more wonderful, Tuda, than you. So I feel like we should just have you be speaking the whole time. If you could speak for me. But I do think the question back, one of the reasons why Kate and I are on this call and want to hear more from you is what have been those efforts that have helped you improve the ecosystems or soil health? Where are there places where we can support efforts that have already been underway? And is there more that we can do to help that? For example, Jack, what of those partnerships worked really well? Is there anything we can do to support them working even better, or replicating some of those locally led efforts in other places, knowing you can't do it exactly the same, you don't want to, because each place is its own unique situation. But I think the question back to everyone is, where can we help? How can we help, knowing we're starting out by explicitly acknowledging the work and the support that you have already done? Also explicitly acknowledging, and as the report says, honoring private property rights, that we're not stepping in to take over that. I think instead we're asking, is there anything we can do to help support these efforts? Knowing, going back to what you said, Jack, too, is I don't care who does it. I would like to support the work being done. I don't even care about the credit, just that we are setting up what we can set up to support the work being done in a way, Brenda, that lasts that lasts for a long time and isn't subject to these big swings. So I think the question is, how do we even better acknowledge these efforts? And what do you need? What nuts and bolts do you feel you need that we can learn from and help?
Well, Martha, I'll be happy to jump in a little bit and at least give you my 2 cents worth, if you will.
Great.
What more do we need? It's an interesting question, because over the past 5 years or so, quite frankly, the human resources and the financial resources that have been placed onto the effort of conserving the land and restoring, improving it. In our area, they've been pretty substantial, to be honest with you. The Intermountain West joint venture would be one that I would note. It's a relatively new one, obviously, on the screen. Their Sonic area, which is Southern Oregon and Northeastern California, Northern California. They've got some great people working with them, and they brought resources to bear. They assisted bringing resources to bear on some of the areas that have improved habitat value and ecological values. Most specifically, the one that probably worked best for us, to be quite honest with you, if I were to put a spotlight on one, that'd be the one where we partnered with the Intermountain West joint venture on a NACA grant and Ducks Unlimited, obviously, and rebuilt all our diversion structures in the creek where we have adjudicated water rights. And that allowed us to make much more efficient distribution of water, especially during the spring migration, which I focused on before. Our NRCS local folks have been excellent to work with. The EQIP grants that have come down through previous administrations, and I'm sure will through this one, I think they provided valuable tools to all of us. EQIP is one of the better projects. One of the other things, focusing on some of the public lands issues and the restoration efforts that have been going on out there, obviously the Sage Grouse Initiative on the national level, and then working with NRCS. NRCS has been able to provide funding for work out on federal lands, and I know they don't work directly with federal folks, but as private landowners and individuals who graze on that property, we can leverage that opportunity between NRCS and BLM. We've done a lot of juniper removal, a lot of work on both Medusa Head and cheatgrass, both of which become monocultures after fire. So we've seen a lot of efforts there. I would hope that as we go through the 30 by 30 process, we continue to realize that there's a real benefit to management of the properties that are included in the conservation effort. And of course, obviously, there's some real examples, obviously, in the forest areas, especially in California, and now in Colorado, where we have in Idaho, where we have, and gosh knows New Mexico has them too. We have them all over the West, wildfires, and certainly, continued to intensify the management of those areas, not just for, obviously, for timber harvest and grazing and so on, but just for assisting in the climate issue and so on. So I think a lot's been done. I probably couldn't point out one thing where you could bring more resources to bear, but just keep an open mind to it, and we appreciate everything so far. So.
Yeah, so Jack, I think just to pick up a little bit more on that question that came in about the nuts and bolts. Just an FYI to share with you, Kate and Martha, and I know that Zach and Leslie are hearing the same thing, but that's the question we're getting from, for lack of a better term, the grassroots. The timing of this is perfect with the to start the conversation in a more broad aspect, because the Restoring America the Beautiful went out last week. We've been able to share that with our groups, our organizations. We, from the Idaho Rangeland Conservation Partnership, we're going to have probably a much smaller discussion, but we're going to look at this topic next week also, from landowner perspective, public lands, and an agency's perspective. But I think that nuts and bolts is going to be huge, and I wish I had a magic answer to give you, but we've got to find that way to again look at what's working out there, the healthy resilient landscapes. We've got some really good partnership projects here in our state with forest, with BLM, and multiple stakeholders. And that balance between, again, kind of from where we live, the urban needs, but still keeping those needs with a sustainable rural focus and the sustainable landscapes. Then that's where we're going to, again, look at it as an opportunity to improve that cooperation between those people who, again, might already be having some things out there, and finding, if I was to answer that on the nuts and bolts and also on resources, to kind of follow up on what Jack's saying, is places we can partner, whether it's groups like, Intermountain West Joint Venture helps fund my position. They work with BLM, they fund different positions, but if there's groups that you can reach out to that could help facilitate gathering that information in the locally led aspect, so that we, that local buy-in and that cross education and the communication between the urban and rural in the West. As you all know, Martha, I loved it that you said your family brought you out West, and then I have so many friends in like different areas, Nature Conservancy, or even in the ranching aspect, that's exactly, and it's a choice, but we need to make sure we capture that. So really appreciate the opportunity to talk about this and help find a way that we can bring those things to the table and help get them quantified.
Thanks, Brenda. And I think Leslie, you had a question. Oh, I think you're on mute, Leslie.
There we go. So I wanted to try to ask a question I think is on a lot of people's minds while we have the opportunity to ask this, but I wanted to say one thing first and see, if you guys, if I'm understanding this correctly. There's been a criticism on in two different ways. One is people don't want top-down management from the federal government. They don't want to be told how this will roll out. On the other hand, when the details come out, when the report comes out and it's light on details, people level criticism that there's not enough details in there. And so my understanding from our conversations is that is intentional, that it is light on detail, because you are actually looking to communities, to landowners, to everybody else to help fill in those details. You're asking the question, how do we together try to conserve this? And so there's a kind of an ongoing conversation that needs to happen now. And as people are sort of demanding details, first off, I would say to people, it's up to us in large way to provide those and help inform this. But I think the thing that has everybody worried that we just have to, tackle head on is this question about, I think, the federal lands, this idea that's been pushed out there quite a bit, that this is a federal land grab, that there could be uses of eminent domain or, massive federal land expansions and taking up of private properties and all of those things that have got people very nervous. And I would just love, for the benefit of the audience, to hear your thoughts on that. Is there anything you can say to assuage those concerns? Are those concerns valid? So let's hear from you guys on that, if you wouldn't mind.
Thanks, Leslie, and Martha, you should jump in here too. Yes, just generally, I think that this report is framed as a call to action, that the president, to your point, Leslie, is saying, here I have laid out what I hope is an inclusive and inspiring vision that we need to do more for the sake of current and future generations to ensure that we have healthy lands and waters. and looking to the communities and people on the ground to help show what solutions are working and what we need to do more of. So would just echo that sentiment that we are looking to Martha's question to see where national leadership is helpful and where we can support what's working. And then, to your second point about maybe some of the concern, and I might call it misinformation out there about this being a federal land grab. It's, I think, just easy to be clear that it is not that there is no eminent domain that will be used here, that this is about, recognizing, as Martha said, honoring private property, respecting private property, and honoring the work that you all are doing. And we are looking to use existing tools and resources to support the work that's happening on the ground and to keep working lands working in their current state. So Martha, anything you would add to that?
No, I think you've said it well. I think we very much appreciate coming from you in Colorado, me in Montana. I think we very much appreciate what comes with federal land ownership and the concerns that states can have with that. And this is all meant to support and honor other methods as well. So I think it's an exciting time. I guess what I would add is I feel like for the first time, a president in the administration has a focus and sees us and sees what we do and sees the value that you bring to conservation and has explicitly recognized it. So I see it as being something very exciting and seeing our work recognized and asking, how do we support you staying on the land? What does that mean? And how do we do that?
Well, thanks for that, Martha and Kate. Really appreciate it. I know you all probably have to jump, but we really do appreciate you spending the hour with us. And there's a lot of questions that we couldn't get to, but I think we're going to try to figure out how we can take all this good input and all this good feedback and all those questions out there and make sure that this discussion keeps going and that this isn't just the only opportunity folks will have to get some of these questions addressed. So I just want to thank you all again. For folks that are in the audience, we still do have another 30 minutes scheduled. And I think what we're going to try to do is hear a story from Tuda and then let that frame how economic viability and ensuring that stewardship is supported with economics and having a discussion among panelists there is going to be a central focus of 3030. So I just want to encourage folks to stay on and make sure that they're still engaged in that, because we do have some good conversations still coming up. But thanks, Kate and Martha.
Thanks for having us. This was wonderful. Appreciate
Yes.
it. And to the panelists, thank you.
Thanks
you.
again for your leadership.
Well, thank you. Well, on that note, Tuda, I will hand it over to you, and we'll look forward to hearing the story.
Thank you. I really feel uplifted by this conversation, and I really love the direction that's going in. And it is all about conservation, but within that framework, there has to be a balance. And I know that people are aware across the United States that rural communities, economies are pretty much dead in the water. I know that here in Harding County, we probably are like many thousands of communities across the United States whose economies have literally dried up. We have the lowest population of any county in the state. We have no workforce. We have a high poverty rate. The average age is 62. We don't have housing for people. In 2020, the grocery store closed, and the gas station, we have one gas station, and it's a pump operated thing. And sometimes the credit card thing doesn't work, so people can't even get gas. We have a coffee shop, a bakery, one restaurant, a microbrewery, and a gun shop, and a small convenience store. And Harding County is a nationally accredited Main Street community. I don't know if y'all are familiar with that, but it is a federally managed program, but each state manages it. And for this tiny community with so many challenges, to be nationally accredited is really quite something. And I have to honor my sister, Mary Lily Campbell, who's just this diehard little worker bee. And very sadly, you know, we all realize that Harding County, and I know many of the other communities in this country, are losing their greatest asset, our youth. Our kids are graduating from high school and they go to college or go to work in the city and they don't come home. And so our dilemma continues. And so we've made progress with our Main Street efforts and actually quite measurable. But I just want to share this thought with you because it's something that we've done and we encourage other communities to do something. You have to tell your young people that you want them to come home. You have to have a place for them to come home to. That you're competing with, you know, the city and not just movies, but everything, the paintball, all these things that kids do now. We started this tradition a few years ago, 4 years ago to be exact. And at graduation time, we give a talk. My sister gave a beautiful talk just last week. We tell our young people in the audience and our graduates that they are the greatest asset that we have. And we tell them when they finish college or if they, you know, are in the military or whatever they want to do, to come home. You come back home and we'll help you find a job. We'll help you start your business. And we want you here. And at graduation, we present them with a mailbox with their name on it. And we tell them there's always a place for them at home. And here's a mailbox with your name on it. And we'll help you start a business and come home and raise your family here, keep the schools open and start your business. And we sincerely mean it and we work toward it. And I'd like to hear from Brenda and Jack and other people watching. I'm curious to know if this initiative has plans for communities like Harding County, and I know there's tribal communities as well. You know, we're all faced with this dilemma of not having young people of reproductive age to keep the communities going and the schools functioning. And so we have to find ways to turn that around. I'm not quite sure how to do it, but maybe working together collaboratively and showing each other up and figuring out ways to do it, we can. And we have a grocery store here that's for sale. If you know of anyone who'd like to start a business in Harding County, we welcome you to come. That's all I have to say about that.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that, Tuda. And I think that's a good segue into some of the discussion that we want to have with the remaining 20 minutes. And also it'd be great to reserve some time to address some of the questions that are out there. Leslie, I'm curious, do you have anything that you would want to add to Tuda's point or underscore Tuda's point about you know, how potentially something in this initiative could work to address some of those concerns or challenges that are facing rural communities and landowners?
Yeah, sure. Can you guys hear me okay?
Mhm.
Okay, great. Well, I think the very short answer that we really need to help people understand is that if land can't support reasonable livelihoods, then only the wealthy are going to be able to own land. And that's just not the future most Americans want, for lots of reasons. But for a long time, conservation has been really fixed on permanent protection rather than improving the economics of stewardship. And society as a whole has a big responsibility in displacing wildlife, consuming natural resources, but we've paid very little as a society for those impacts. We don't have endangered species in the middle of most urban areas. And the average American right now is paying $400, more than $400 a year for soda pop but less than $2 a year in taxes to help conserve and recover endangered species. So, that's something we really need to zoom in on. And when we start to lose those resources, society now turns to ranchers and farmers who have managed to keep that land intact and tries to put this moral and financial responsibility on them to conserve what remains. And that's just not working. It's not working economically. It's not working from the regulatory standpoint. And it's a large part of why we have such a divide over conservation in this country. So, rather than trying to put more land into federal ownership all the time, which taxpayers would still have to pay someone to manage, why don't we start paying people who are already on the land for the many things that they're already providing, that we're asking them and the land to provide. So I think that is a path. We have got to learn to live on the land that sustains us in a way that is sustainable long-term. And there's a huge economic component to that has to be looked at. And I know there's a lot of hope for carbon banking, kind of based on a sort of a wetland banking model and other ecosystem service market opportunities, which are emerging, but they are still nascent. And it's not clear yet how much those things are going to really work in the West. That's something we are looking hard at. I think we need the West is an arid place. There's maybe less science available on the carbon sequestration portions of it, things like that. I think we need a better toolkit for the West that recognizes and supports the many values that Western lands and the people who steward them provide. And this could be in the form of things like habitat leases. It could be stewardship contracts for the recovery of imperiled species, or for the improvement of water resources or forest health. It certainly needs to mean better regulatory structures that incentivize rather than disincentivize landowners who step up to help wildlife. I think there's a whole range of things that could be put out there, but we just have to begin thinking about stewardship as a central component of conservation and how we create the economic drivers and support for that stewardship. So.
Zach, I'll jump in real quickly. Leslie, I certainly appreciate those comments and agree wholeheartedly. As you probably know, and Brenda, maybe it's happening in Idaho too, but in California and Wyoming both, they're trying to put a focus on monetizing ecosystem services, and it's a difficult subject. I don't think that ranchers and landowners, in fact, I know we're not looking for a handout, if you will, but we would like, as Tuda said earlier, kind of some sort of recognition, and if it's provided through monetary resources or something, that's fine. But I think there's an effort going forward. If that can be part of the 30 by 30 initiative, that'll be great.
So yeah, Jack, if I could just jump in, I think that is a great point, because I actually wrote down some notes on that previously. As any difference in business owners, whether you own a gas station, a grocery store, whether you've chosen to, like we have, go into ranching, or and then also be involved in these landscape scale conversations. Every person is different, and there are some incentives that are out there, maybe monetary, that we can look to, but there are, I'm thinking of my closest partner being my husband. It's more like Tuda said, it's more just about that cross education and that recognition of what we're doing out here that's helping with clean water, with resilient landscapes, with fuel load reductions on the targeted grazing programs or fire, with partners, with our BLM, with landowners, with the county commissioners. Those type of things, it's more important to get the education portion out there for helping, I always refer to them as detractors, helping them understand what is already going on out there that makes it a place you want to drive out to and see, makes you able to see wild sheep, wild horses, birds, fish, wildlife. So I would totally agree with you, Jack. It's not always monetary. There has to be, like for everything, when I take my toolbox out on the tractor in the field, I don't just have a hammer and I don't just have baling twine. I've got screwdrivers and wrenches and all of that. We need tools in the toolbox to make this 30-30 conservation successful. And I think I look at this, Tuda, I like, you know, we talked about this the other day, but it's an opportunity to get to help craft. How do we get that recognition? And, you know, like I said, there's different areas there. And your counties, you know, if the economic drivers change in a county, Tuda, like you're talking about, when you lose your youth or you lose to development or that type of thing, that has a ripple effect with county government, because then they have to start making decisions and your tax base changes and your whole structure of your community and your community that is working together could change. So there's a lot of conversations there, and there's a lot of ways that you can provide that acknowledgement without having it to always be throwing money at it.
Thanks for that, everyone.
I would like to say something to just sort of like shore up what Jack and Brenda has said. No, I see this as an opportunity for landowners and land stewards everywhere, and I see it as an opportunity for rural communities. I think there are people who don't agree with me, and that's all right. I think there are some people who have mistrust in the government. I do not. I trust this program. I trust this initiative because 20 years of experience in working with agencies like the NRCS and the Partnership Fish and Wildlife, all of these things assure me that without that support, I couldn't have gotten done on the land what we have accomplished. It would not have been able to happen. It was just too big a bite to chew. But one of the things that I hear in this report is trust. This is such an important word. And I trust the government. I want them to trust me as a landowner and know that I am willing, ready, and capable of doing what I say I'm going to do on this ranch, and that I will be delighted to share any information with them and measure the improvements and be acknowledged for it in some way. Just say, thank you for the good work you've done. That would be enough. We're all on this planet together. We're going to either sink or swim. And I think we're going to we have a much better chance at it if we work together. And with 70% of the landmass in this country privately owned, this initiative really rests on the shoulders of landowners. And I think we're all conservationists at heart. I really believe we care and love the land. And I think we need to set aside fears and threats and turn to hope and opportunity and roll up our sleeves and get to work. That's what I'm going to do. And I consider myself a landowner leader. I hope a few other folks will feel the same way I do. I hope a lot of you will. So thank you all. That's about all I have to add.
Well, thanks so much for that, everyone. I'm going to try to address some of the questions that we've been asked throughout the day and get your all's thoughts on it. And one that might fit in well here is how can we transition this conversation on conservation so that voluntary conservation programs and conservation agreements are counted as a best management practice and counted as a mechanism to support adaptive stewardship. I think when you're talking about trust, Tuda, I think in recognition that is going to be one of the key pillars of this to, you know, if it's to succeed, I think recognizing those voluntary efforts. So I'm just curious to get all of your input on that question.
So Zach, if I understood you correctly, you're talking about conservation and conservation easements. Is that what you were framing?
Yeah, and it was generally looking at, the question was transitioning the focus on conservation more toward recognizing voluntary informal conservation
Okay.
agreements. So if
Yeah.
landowners are enrolling in these, how is that going to get recognized under 30 by 30 is, I think, probably the way to sum that up.
Yeah, and I appreciate that, because I think, Tuda, you just gave a great segue to probably many that are listening on here. Jack talked about it early on I always joke about getting a little bit long in the tooth and knowing that you've seen a number of initiatives that have come forward. And so it gets back to that trust factor, and the opportunity that we're having here today to talk about this brings it right to what you just said, Zach, is this is bigger than conservation easements and programs that might already be in place with NRCS or things that are public programs like we talked about that might already be there. But that's where, rather than a top-down approach, this level of bringing it to this type of discussion and get locally led conversations going, having the trust to have that flexibility to transition on some of these things, to bring in people, neighbors, others that are probably already doing some of these things that aren't in formal conservation easements or that type of thing. It's a perfect opportunity to help guide that discussion on how we transition. Now, that was a pretty loaded question because I don't have the answer for it, but it's certainly, again, let's work to get it right so that we keep that trust and we can bring in some of the partners with the education, some of our neighbors about, you have best management practices. I like to talk about the fact that under our BLM permit, we've got terms and conditions. Some of those terms and conditions are best management practices that promote conservation on federal lands. You're going to have to think outside the box for some of those conversations. Now, I don't want things added to my terms and conditions that are going to restrict me. I want flexibility to make that work better. So it's the perfect transition to expand on these conversations. And that's how we'll get buy-in from some of the skeptics and some of our neighbors. And that's how we'll build trust both directions. Those are my thoughts on it.
Well, thanks for that.
I pretty much agree with Brenda, obviously, but I think that a starting point might be to recognize, and you used that term earlier, recognize and validate what's already being done. And I realize that all three of your panelists here are coming from rather expansive and what I consider pretty huge landscapes. I mean, we've got 3 ranches in a 45-mile area, probably 45-mile square area. So consequently, we see a lot of this land as already being conserved and would qualify for whatever definition you want to put on under 30 by 30. So I think that that's what we'd look for. I'm not sure that it is required that the agencies, put a higher land designation on a piece of property to necessarily conserve it. I've given the example before. We have a WSA, a wilderness study area, which of course is run like a wilderness. We have a WSA right in the middle of our permit, and I would challenge anybody to come in and see the difference between the property on the outside of the WSA and the property on the inside. Granted, on the inside the WSA, we have restrictions that we have to attend to, but we can manage our cattle within the WSA just as easily as we can outside. So my point there is, recognize and validate what you already have out there, and don't necessarily jump to a higher designation or a higher level of preservation than we already have. It's not necessary in every instance. So.
Great. Thanks for that. I want to try to get at one more question that came in because I think it fits well with this. And so maybe, Jack, I would face this at you first. And I think, so what tools do landowners need? And, I know you have a lot of experience with different regulatory structures, whether it's the ESA or NEPA. I know you've done a lot of work in that area, but so maybe it's a two-part question. Maybe it's, what barriers are there on regulatory structures, and then what tools do you need, and what type of flexibility do you need to complement that?
Well, without knowing all those who are attending the call, I'll throw out an observation. And of course, this is probably maybe a little bit more unique to our circumstance here in California than it is in New Mexico or Idaho. As you know, there's a new map floating around, Brenda, that's going to put northeastern California in with Idaho, and I appreciate that. What I'm leaning towards, Zach, is that our issues, our obstacles that are out there, probably our biggest obstacles are those that make a process of conservation tedious, are pretty much related to the state of California. And so on the federal side, we've seen good cooperation recently. I would suggest that I hate to, like Brenda, I don't want to focus on just one organization, because there are a number of them out there that I think have played an important role in bridging the gap between landowners and the government, federal government specifically. But things like the Intermountain West Joint Venture have allowed us to apply resources to the ground and do good conservation work, good restoration work. So, I don't see a lot of obstacles there. I think just continuing to enhance those relationships.
Great. And I would open that up to anyone else who wants to chime in, Leslie, including yourself.
I would just jump in and say that, before thinking about more protections or more of this, figure out what are those barriers, that are in the way of stewardship. Because everywhere we go across the West, I don't care who you talk to out on the land, if you sit down at a farm ranch table, they will tell you, we're trying to make the world a better place. We're trying to leave our corner of the world a better place. People in general are trying to do good work. And I know from having been a land manager myself for 16 years that good intention isn't enough. You actually have to have the supports in place to be able to do that, whether that's the knowledge, the resources, the public policies. And in many cases, what the public is not aware of, that we on the inside of the fence are aware of, is there's a whole obstacle field to trying to do good stewardship out there. And one of the areas we need more flexibility, for example, on federal grazing. So, WLA has been very supportive of outcomes-based grazing efforts, increasing, that flexibility so that we can adapt management to changing conditions and new science and all the things that, real land requires of us. So, we've been a proponent of the flexibility. And then there are a number of those other sort of hurdles. So I think, the administration could gain great ground for the sake of conservation and working lands by looking hard at the real barriers that are out there.
Zach, I could throw in a couple of words here. I agree with what Leslie has just said. I think flexibility is a really critical element that could be enhanced with some of the conservation programs. And for me, personally speaking, some of the paperwork is burdensome. It seems to me that if, a contract is simple, it's far more appealing to me. So those are just a couple of areas that I think could be improved. For some people who, there are families out here that don't use computers, and so it can be rather daunting to get involved. And I think we need to, again, if it's locally led, there's help from your neighbor. But if it isn't, then it becomes more of a task. So that's how I feel.
Well, thanks for that, everyone. I see that we are right up against the 30-minute mark, and I want to be respectful of everyone's time. So Leslie, do you want to provide some final thoughts and close us out?
You bet. I'll just start by saying thank you so much to everybody that's taken the time to be here today and join us, and particularly our panelists who took the time to be here. I just want to underscore this is just the beginning of a very important conversation. And it's particularly crucial that the voices of those who steward the land and who are directly affected by the outcomes are at the center of the conversation. And you can expect certainly to hear from us soon. We're going to be doing additional events and hosting focused discussions so that we can continue to provide input to the administration. We hope you all will reach out to us on an ongoing basis with your thoughts and comments. And if you want to stay informed with what we're doing, if you haven't already, go to the westernlandownersalliance.org website and sign up. It's free. And if, of course, I have to say this as the executive director of a nonprofit organization, if you value the work that we're doing on behalf of Western Land Stewardship and the opportunity to be involved in these decisions, please do consider making a donation and supporting us. We do depend on your support. But most of all, I think this is our opportunity, probably more than I've ever seen in my lifetime, to come forward with a voice from the land and try to shape the future that we really want out there. So thank you.